Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be doing part 2 of my card reviews for the upcoming expansion, the Covert Operations expansion coming out June 11th, I think. Don't quote me on that, check the article. And if you haven't seen part 1, check my channel, watch that, as well as there's a separate video going over all of the cards leaving the game through rotation and the cards coming back. That had previously been rotated, so I talked about all that before. Now we're going to be talking about all the new cards that have been revealed in the past week or so. There's just under 20, I think, and there's some very interesting cards here, and we're getting a bit into some more of the archetypes and synergies that we're going to get from this expansion. So, without further ado, let's roll the intro and jump into the cards.
What a performance there by J-King.
J-King, full plot armor.
J-King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J-King is our world champion! J-King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alright, so I have the cards, not in the order they were revealed, but I've rather grouped them by nations just because it's going to be a little easier to see what each nation is getting. So, Britain, the Britain cards we've seen so far hint towards Britain getting a lot of commando synergy, and commandos being a big theme for them. And what we have here is the 10th Para Battalion, a 1-cost 2/1. Deployment gets +1/+1 and a blitz if you have given an order this turn. So, if you've played an order already this turn, you play this as a 1-cost 3/2 blitz infantry with 1 operation cost. This seems remarkably bad. So even if you had, like, what deck are you trying to play this in? Because if you're playing commandos, you're not playing enough units, you're not taking the front line enough, you're not being competitive enough on the board to possibly want a 3/2 blitz. And if you're using this as just 2 credits to trade out something to the front line, it's true, 2 credits to deal 3 damage to the front line is not terrible. It's not like Britain has the wealth of cheap removal options. However, the fact that if you're not playing against an aggressive deck that's taking the front line, against control, 2 credits on a 3/2, it's not going to be doing a lot. Like, they're just going to remove it, or they're going to have guards up because you're not attacking HQ anyways, so this isn't going to accomplish much in most matchups if you're playing like an order-heavy commando-type deck. So the question is there some form of like aggressive Britain that's not using orders for commando synergy, but maybe just using orders for something like combined arms, for example? Would they want to run this card? And the answer is probably not, because it has operation cost. Now, obviously, if it didn't have operation cost, it would be quite good. Not as good as cavalry, because the blitz is also conditional. But yeah, with 1 operation cost, this card is just incredibly slow, and I think we can all be happy that this card is not very good, because if you had a 1-cost, win the game on turn 1 blitzer that only works if you have a 0-cost order to combine with it, it's sort of just adding to the snowballing effect. Like, we've seen 0-cost orders in the past, and they're always incredibly powerful, so if you throw in a free blitzer with that, a bit too powerful. Instead what we have is kind of weak. And as a Para Battalion, I imagine that you can get this off of Baker Street Irregulars, which again is not typically going to be what you want, but it's not always bad, because if you play Baker Street Irregulars for 1 credit and it's an order, and then you pick Para Battalion, you can immediately play it and trade it out, and there's going to be a lot of situations where getting a free Para Battalion to trade out something in the front line can be good. So again, you might not put this in your deck, but I think we might see this card a fair amount. Then we have the 7th Scottish Borderers. This is also possibly a commando card, also possibly from Baker Street Irregulars. I hope that the cards that they have these develop pools for, that they post a list of all the possibilities. But the Scottish Borderers is a 2-cost 1/3 infantry, intel 3. That's a lot of intel. And it has the text, your excess intel deals damage to the enemy HQ. So if your opponent has, I don't know, 5 cards in hand, and you know what 4 of them are, and you play Scottish Borderers, you will intel 3 on a hand that has 1 available option to intel, meaning you have wasted 2 intel, which means you will deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ. Now, they have said that this does not stack. So if you have if you play a 7th Scottish Borderers and deal the 2 damage, and then you play a 2nd Scottish Borderers, you're not dealing 6 damage, you're just dealing 3. So it's not an incredibly effective burn tool, but it is not irrelevant, and it's a British card, meaning that you can run this on top of all of your regular Poland cards. You're not required to take out Poland cards from your deck to put this in, and they're starting to get close to an overwhelming amount of Intel-themed burn cards. Like, we have that Polish plane that's seen play in Exile. I'm blanking on the name of it off the top of my head, but the plane that whenever they play an Intel card, deal damage to their HQ. So, there might be just this overwhelming Intel synergy package thing that's going on here. And again, I think you can probably get this off of Baker Street Irregulars, and there's times where maybe you're going to want to play this. But in general, I don't think this fits into regular Brit-Poland Legions, because that's typically a control deck, and Legions don't care how much you're intelling for, they just want you to intel for any amount. So I don't think this card is going to see play right away, but I wouldn't be too surprised if people find a way to make this work in some sort of burn-oriented, like tier 3, maybe low tier 2 style deck in the future. Then we have the 15th Recon Regiment. It is a 3-cost, 3/3 limited infantry, and when you play it, you target a unit, and the 15th Recon Regiment gets +1/+1 and guard when the targeted unit deals damage. And this can be deals damage in any capacity. It can attack something, it can be attacked, it can attack HQs, or it could be a commando that pings something because you trigger the commando effect. So basically, you pick anything, and it can be an opponent's unit, so you can target the opponent's unit and then they attack you in the face, and now this gets +1/+1 and guard. So immediately, 3-cost, 3/3 infantry is bad. Very, very bad. Absolutely awful. 3-cost, 4/4 infantry with guard is slightly better than the sort of the standard rate, which is like a 3-cost, 3/4 guard. So 3-cost, 4/4 guard, not bad, but again, it's a little harder than that. Now, what's interesting about this is I think based on the wording that this is going to be able to trigger multiple times, so it would continue to grow. So like if you play this on a commando and then the commando pings face like 4 times, that this is going to get +4/+4 and gain guard 4 times, and the gain guard 4 times doesn't matter. But yeah, I think this should be able to trigger multiple times. But again, this is probably only going to trigger once. And because realistically, you're not going to want to play this in commando decks. Commando decks don't really run guard, and if you're going to run guard, it's probably not going to be 15th Recon Regiment, because you don't want to be pinging your opponent in the face. And like, it's not a terrible card. Like, it's an interesting card for draft, or like if you low collection playing against a lot of aggro decks, where you can just throw this out, target an opponent's unit, and if they hit face, this gets +1/+1 in guard, and now you have a guard, and if they don't hit face, they trade out, including the unit that they're trading out with. You're essentially forcing them to trade, and you're forcing a specific unit to trade, typically, unless they can trade it out with other stuff. And I mean, like, forcing a trade's not terrible, but again, you kind of want to be proccing this. It seems hard to use. Then we get to another British card, which is the Shark Mark III, which is a 2-cost, 1/2 bomber. Deployment, deal damage to target enemy equal to friendly air units. So a couple things about this card. It says target enemy, so this can hit the HQ. You can target HQ with this, but you can't target friendly cards. And 2, it's friendly air units, not friendly bombers, not friendly fighters, not friendly British air units. So this counts all air units. You can run this in an ally nation, you can run this with fighters, you can run this with bombers. You can target a unit, you can target the HQ, this can be a burn card, this can be removal. So I think if you compare this to Albacore, which is the most natural thing to compare it to, it's a 2-cost, 1/2, same rarity, same everything, and its deployment is deal 1 damage to an enemy unit and pin it. Now, if you just play Shark on its own, it's the exact same thing as Albacore, but it doesn't pin. It would just be, if you on its own completely, it's just a 2-cost, 1/2, deal 1 damage to a target enemy. And that's, the pin is pretty important. However, if you have any other amount of air units on the board, this starts to get out of hand very, very quickly. So if you do like turn 1 Swordfish, and then you do turn 2 Shark, deal 2 damage, and that can kill a 35T. And that can be very, very big. Or, you do turn 1 Swordfish, turn 2 Gladiator, close air support, keep him alive, turn 3 Shark for 3 damage, and you get the 2 attack on the Bomber from the Swordfish. Things are starting to get out of hand pretty fast. Or, if you're playing air and you're playing against control, you had early game board control, you turned that into a lot of damage to the HQ, but then they hit a board wipe, and now you're running out of cards, and it's difficult to redevelop a board because your opponent's just going to remove all of your planes as you play them. What do? You do Gladiator, Gladiator, Shark, Shark, and suddenly you've burst them for 7 to the HQ from hand for 6 credits. And that's pretty good, because Air has a very easy time bringing their opponent into the, sort of 8 and below range very easily. And previously they relied on cards like Empire Strikes to get them over that finish line. Now you have cards like Shark. Now Shark's not an AoE. It's much worse than Empire Strikes, don't get me wrong. Empire Strikes is insane. But this is a very powerful card, and depending on what the meta is looking like, Air definitely could come back in popularity. Now I think Air, close air support is one of the most powerful cards in the game. Swordfish is one of the most powerful cards in the game. I think people have been sleeping on Air just because they lost Empire Strike, so it feels bad to play. The games you lose feel bad to lose, and that has never been true with Air before. But a card like Shark could bring people back to the deck, and once you have more people playing the deck, more people trying out different variations, I think they're going to quickly realize that Air is not as bad as people seem to think it is right now, and it's going to lead to a lot more people playing Air. So it is interesting that Britain has, they're getting tools for Air, and they're also getting tools for Commandos, and Shark, I'm happy, with Shark. It's not a card I'm super worried about. I think it's going to be annoying and it's going to be powerful, but, it's a balanced card. It's a special. You do have to make some cuts for it. It's really hard to make it deal more than 4 damage, but dealing 4 damage, it's quite powerful. Yeah, I think this is going to be a very powerful card. I think you're going to see a lot of this. And then we get to the German cards, and we get to the 738th Jaeger Regiment, and this is a card that I think we are also going to be seeing a lot of for a very long time, until it gets nerfed. Because 738 Jaeger Regiment is a 1-cost, 1/3 Blitz Infantry, so it has the sort of Red Devil's base body, but it's a limited rather than a special. And just 1-cost, 1/3 Blitz Infantry is good. You're going to want it to do something, but it's pretty good. We run a lot of 1-cost, 1/3 Blitz things. And what it does is quite good, because deployment, target a unit. Draw a card when that unit is destroyed. So, the unit you are targeting, if it dies before the Jaeger Regiment, you draw a card. Now, again, this can target a friendly unit or an enemy unit. So, for example, your opponent plays turn 1 Cavalry Regiment. You play turn 1 Jaeger Regiment, target their cavalry. They now have to figure out a way to remove Jaeger Regiment without losing the cavalry. So they can't do Type 93 trade, because then you draw a card. And they can't just do 35T, because then they can't kill it. So 1/3. And then you'll be able to get the trade onto the cavalry on the following turn. Now, they could honorable death it, but then they've given you a card anyways, and they just honorable deathed on turn 2 against a 1/3 infantry. And there's almost certainly better honorable death targets in your deck. There's almost certainly better things they could have been using for their credits on that turn. And if you went first, you might just pass, and then they play cavalry, and then you play Jaeger on their cavalry and trade on the same turn on turn 2 to go 1-for-1, plus you get a card draw, and you have the 1/1 body left over. Or maybe you're playing German-Japan or Japan-German, you play turn 1 cavalry, they play turn 1 Recon Regiment or anything else, and then you do turn 2 Jaeger Regiment on your cavalry, trade your cavalry away, and now you've drawn a card. And again, it's only one card. You can only possibly get one card out of this, but a 1-cost, 1/3 Blitzer is just good stats. It's good in frontline, it's good in hinds, it's good for any deck that wants to gain board presence and board control early in the game. And it will very, very often draw one card. Now, you can look at this at a card like 22nd Infantry, where you will very often draw one card, but sometimes you don't draw a card, sometimes you draw 8 cards and win the game off of it. This will only ever draw one card, but you can very, very consistently draw one card off of this. And that just makes it so good, because Germany has always had a big issue drawing cards. That's why you see people running cards like 38T, where it's just a 3-cost, 2/3 tank, battle, or deployment, draw a card. That's not good. People are just running that because Germany really doesn't have a lot of card draw options. There's no Shermans in Germany. And even in US Germany, they're trying to run card draw on top of that because Sherman's is not enough. A 40 card deck is a lot, and you don't really want to be running 22nd Infantries in frontline if you can help it. I think the 738th Jaeger Regiment is going to be a staple in US frontline. And again, US frontline is losing Red Devils, and they can just immediately slot in Jaeger Regiment. Yes, it's not a US card, so it's not going to be able to draw with Sherman. So you will need to find more Blitz US cards to get to the front line to draw with Sherman. But this is an incredibly powerful card, and it's powerful in a way that is less frustrating than Red Devils is powerful, because your opponent getting a free card draw, or like mostly free card draw, on like turn 2 is annoying, but immediately losing the game because your opponent had Red Devils into 99th, and now they have a 3/5 that costs 1 more to trade into every single time you target it, is far more annoying. So this is an acceptable replacement for Red Devils in a lot of similar decks in US Germany midrange and German US midrange, German US Heinz. I don't know if this is going to see play in Japan German aggro, because that deck is faster. The 1 operation cost is a big sort of holding the card back, and also Japan Germany has a lot of options for card draw, and typically does not need additional card draw in the deck as much. Now, again, it might be better than Recon Regiment. It might not be. We'll have to see. But I think at the very least in Japan, Germany, you'd be much more happy playing this on turn 1 without targeting anything and just losing the card draw and just playing it as a 1-cost 1/3 infantry. But yeah, this card, very powerful, going to see a ton of play. Then we have Hit the Drop Point, which is a countermeasure. Again, Germany's theme seems to be countermeasures. At least that's what we've seen from the previous cards, like the Sturm Brigade Rhodos, the 7-cost 7/7 that has its cost reduced by 2 every time you trigger a countermeasure. Well, they're getting a new 0-cost countermeasure, so it's going to be very easy to trigger this. And it is Hit the Drop Point. When the enemy deploys a unit, suppress it, can affect a covert unit. So this is just when your opponent plays the unit, it triggers. So it's just 0-cost trigger if your opponent plays a unit, which is probably going to happen almost every turn. So this is just a countermeasure you can trigger essentially at will, which is going to be very, very good for reducing the cost of Sturm Brigade at the downside of you're losing a card. So how good is Suppress? Well, Duress is very, very popular, and that's 0-cost suppress a unit. This is also 0-cost suppress a unit, but it can target covert units, which Duress can't, and it reduces the cost of Sturm Brigade. The difference is your opponent gets to play the card first, and that's a very big deal, because this does not suppress deployment effects. This is not an evasive action. Deployment effects will trigger, and then it gets suppressed. Now, if the deployment effect is to gain stats, so for example, you play 5th Rangers into this, it will gain the stats, and then it will get suppressed, or it will lose the stats. So if you deploy it and it gains Blitz, it will lose the Blitz. Or, if you deploy it and it has Blitz, it will lose Blitz because it will get suppressed. It will lose Guard, it will lose whatever. But if they play a card like the Panzer Grenadiers, for example, the Panzer Grenadier will lose Blitz. It will just be a 3/3 vanilla. They can't push it up immediately. But they will still add the 35T and the combined arms to hand. So, Hit the Drop Point, it's a little low value, I think, and in the countermeasure deck, it's really going to come down to, can you fit in card draw? Because this does not draw a card, and you're going to need to replace this in your hand, because there's so many times where your opponent will play a unit where getting suppressed essentially doesn't matter, and now you're just down a card. You just played 1 less card than your opponent. So yeah, that's pretty bad. Now, how good is the can affect covert unit part? That one is going to be difficult to say, because 1, how common is covert going to be? And 2, if there is a lot of covert, how often are they going to be playing the covert unit first? Are they going to be playing around this? Is there going to be room to play around this? Do they care about playing around this? That is a question. So I think we're going to see a fair amount of this. If you compare this to something like the Mighty Fall, which came out in the Brothers in Arms expansion, where the big thing was Veteran. Veteran was the big flashy new mechanic. And the anti-veteran card was Mighty Fall, which is just a 3-cost order, destroy a veteran unit. And the unit has to be in veteran form, I believe. That card is laughably bad. That is a non-card. No one is playing enough veteran for that card to possibly be good. Now, if you compare that to Hit the Drop Point, where this seems to be like the anti-covert card, this is a card that could see play even if there's no covert in the meta. Maybe just suppressing things on deployment is good enough. We'll have to see. But I kind of doubt anyone's going to run this more than maybe a 1-of-tech card in certain decks, in a similar fashion to how evasive action is run as a 1-of-tech card in certain decks. But we'll have to see. Now, then we get to Japan. So Japan has the credit denial theme, and we've seen a couple cards for the credit denial theme. And there's more cards for the credit denial theme that we're going to look at. But first, we have to look at a couple other cards they got. They have a covert card, the Shogun Detachment, a 3-cost 5/1 covert destruction draw a card. So a 3-cost 5/1 infantry is really, really bad. A 3-cost 5/1 infantry destruction draw card is still really, really bad. Why? Because it dies to sickle, it dies to Tora, it dies to supply shortage, it dies to supply priorities, it dies to so many things that it just takes this unit off. However, this unit has covert, and that means it has to either attack or be attacked before any order can target it, or deployment effect. So, how good is that? I think this card might be deceptively good. I'm not saying this card is great. I'm not even saying this card is necessarily going to see play in any tier 1 or even necessarily tier 2 decks. I'm saying that this card is probably better than you think it is right now. Because 5/1, if your opponent can't attack into it, you can push it to the front line, and then if your opponent still can't attack into it, you get a free swing for 5. And that can be a 5 into a guard, that can be a 5 into the HQ, and then they can sickle it. And at that point, you've spent, 5 credits, you've dealt 5 damage, and you draw a card, and your opponent had to spend credits and a card to remove it. That's pretty good. Now, obviously, there's going to be situations where you're playing against Jagro as Jagro, and they have the board, and then you play Shogun Detachment, and probably they'll just go face. But if they don't go face, they'll, I don't know, maybe play a Type 94 and then trade into this. And then, this is a lot worse. And the fact that it doesn't have Blitz makes it a little slow. However, not every deck is able to ping. Pinging is not an easy thing, and pinging without a unit attacking is not an easy thing. And if there's any other covert cards you're playing, there's going to be some confusion as to what it is in the first place. But I think Shogun Detachment is going to be a very good card. And the 5 attack is going to be scary, because if there's any low attack covert cards that you want to be trading into, it's going to be scary to just run a 1 of Shogun Detachment, because they're going to attack into the low attack thing with their big guy to get the free value trade, and then it's Shogun Detachment, and oh no, your Schutzen hit a 5/1. Get wrecked. So yeah, this card's going to be probably pretty frustrating. You might get blown out by Shogun Detachment when you think it's other things. But it's an interesting covert card, and maybe Japan is going to be the ally if sort of Soviet covert decks become a thing. Then we have a interesting card, Grand Plans, a Japanese standard. A order, choose and discard a card to draw a card with higher cost from your deck. So this is a second choose and discard a card. The first one we had was Experimental Flight, and that's been in the game for a very long time. That's choose and discard a card in your hand to add a random Soviet plane to your hand. And that card sees a lot of play in the Betty deck, just because 1 credit choose and discard a card at will is very good. But it doesn't... the effect of Experimental Flight has not always been great. Now, obviously, anybody who's played the deck any amount of time probably remembers the one time that they were able to get 3 Sheedens and off of Experimental Flights and just win by bursting for 8 every turn for 3 turns with their 3 Sheedens or something like that. Or they got a Kawanishi and played Kawanishi Desperate Measures to blow up a board or something like that. But Experimental Flight, more often than not, is just going to give you a Pete or a Seiyun, and you play it and it's bad, but hey, you were able to play 1 credit, trigger a discard effect in your hand, and generate a card. Now, Grand Plans is very different, because Grand Plans draws a card in your deck, and not just any card, a card that costs more. So that means that Grand Plans, if you discard a Betty, it's going to draw a card that costs 3 or more. The issue I see with this card is if you discard a Sally, you're drawing a card that costs 5 or more. And there's not a lot of cards that cost 5 or more that you're typically running in the self-discard deck. There's Shiden and Ginjas. And if you discard Ginja, you're almost certainly not running any card in your deck that costs 7 or more. So this means I don't know how it would work if, does it draw the highest cost card in your deck if there's none higher, or if there's none... Oh my goodness. Someone honked right outside my door. If you draw the... Do you draw the highest cost card in your deck if none are higher, or if none are higher, do you just not draw? We'll have to see how that works, but I think that there's a very good possibility this sees play in the Betty deck. I don't think you're going to be running 8 copies of this. Like, I don't think you're going to be running 4 Grand Plans and 4 Experimental Flights. You don't need to discard that much. Now, whether Grand Plans is better than Experimental Flight, I think we will have to see. Something the self-discard deck does run into a lot is the fact that your card quality is kind of low. In terms of, like, each individual card in your deck is kind of low, and you draw through it really, really fast. And the Betty deck loses on fatigue a not infrequent amount of time. And Grand Plans is only going to make you hit fatigue faster than Experimental Flight, because Experimental Flight is generating cards in your deck. Grand Plan is cycling through your deck even faster. And the question is going to be, is cycling through your deck faster going to be a good thing? Grand Plans could also be used in a, like, combo deck, as sort of like a Lesser of Two Evils-esque effect, where we've seen in combo decks run Lesser of Two Evils, where you play Lesser of Two Evils, and you draw 2 cards, and then you discard, like, just another stall or healing card in your deck, to try to get deeper into your deck faster for combos. Grand Plans could be used to fish for specific things, like if you want to find a Kawanishi, you can just run a lot of 5 and 6 cost things, and then you play Grand Plans, and you get a guaranteed draw on your Kawanishi. I don't think that's going to be a super relevant use of this card, but it is an interesting thing that you could theoretically do if you have a specific combo you want to find. Then we have a Japan Elite card, Carrier Battle, which is a 3-cost order, deal 3 damage to any target, can target your units, their HQ, your HQ, whatever, deal 3 damage. Add a Carrier Battle to the enemy hand, with all numericals 1 higher, meaning it will be a 4-cost, deal 4 damage, and if they play it, it will add a 5-cost, deal 5 damage to your hand. So basically, it's like a slightly better, like, it's like a From the People that can hit the HQ, it's like a Air Blitz that can hit units. That's one way to think of this card, but it also adds a card to your opponent's hand, and that can be really annoying, because yes, it gives them a bit of reach, but if you're playing an aggressive deck, they will almost never use the deal 4 damage unless either you have a Shiden on board that they cannot deal with, so they would rather give you deal 5 damage and kill the Shiden, or if they're playing it to win the game. And if you're on 4 health as Jago, you've probably lost the game anyways, because it means your board is gone and they have units hitting you in the face. So, just on its own, 3-cost, deal 3 damage to anything. Not terrible. But it also takes up a card in your opponent's hand, and if they're playing something like Frontline or Jagro or even German Midrange, that's probably not going to be a big deal, and you're just giving them a useful tool. However, if you're playing against Control, very often Control will be on 8 or 9 cards, even against Jagro. So by playing Carrier Battle, you're just putting a card into their hand that is taking up space. And this isn't exclusively an aggro card. Now, it's easy to think of this as an aggro card first, because it's burn, you can just play burn from hand, and then they don't want to give it back to you because then you get more burn. But you could play this in a control deck as removal, and now if you're against an aggro deck, you know, presumably you're playing a lot of healing if you're playing Carrier Battle. But if you're playing against a control deck, you could either wait until they're at 8 cards, like you could play Phony War Carrier Battle, they go up to 9, or you could play Phony War Honor and Loyalty, they draw up to 9, then you play Carrier Battle and they don't get the extra Carrier Battle because their hand is already full. There's a lot of uses for this card. It's very similar to Take Liberty, which is an not Take Liberty, Take Initiative, which is an old card that existed in the game. It came out in Allegiance. It's been rotated for a while. I think it got rotated in the first rotation, which is 2 credits, draw a card, put this into your opponent's hand with the numericals 1 higher. So it would be 3 credits, draw 2, and then you get 4 credits, draw 3, etc., back and forth. And you would use that to get through your deck faster and also clog up their hand. You'd play it in like Japan, France resistance decks. Now, this is similar, and also, actually something that I just realized by misspeaking, is the Take Liberty. You could play Carrier Battle and then play Take Liberty to shuffle the Carrier Battle into their deck so they don't even necessarily immediately get the effect of it. Or you could play Carrier Battle and then play Enigma because you're adding a card to their hand. It gives you more Enigma value. There's some very interesting uses for this card. I think it's going to be a little hard to make the cut into tier 1 Jagro, just because that deck, you don't want to be running a lot of orders because you want a very, very high unit density, because it just doesn't have the reach. There's too much healing in the game. You need to rely on units. You need to rely on being able to make very big boards. And unlike a card like Audacity, Audacity generates a board, bombing rate can hit more targets, and, you know, doesn't give them a card to hand. And Shenano can deal a lot of damage, and it can deal a lot of ping damage to deal with opponents' boards. It's sort of an AoE. Desperate Measures is coming back, so you're going to be putting Desperate Measures back in decks. I just don't see this making the cut, but it's a good card which could very easily see play in a wide number of decks in the future. Then we get to 2 new credit denial cards that have been revealed, or credit denial synergy cards, I should say. So what we have seen so far is Desperate Measures is coming back, which is 2 credits, deal 2 damage to all enemies, lose a credit slot. Then they have Air, Land, and Sea, which is a 1 credit, develop a card in your deck, lose a credit slot. So it's 1 credit, get a extra copy of a card from your deck. You see 3 copies. You see 3 cards from your deck, you pick 1 to get an extra copy and add it to your hand. That's a very good effect, lose a credit slot. And you've seen the 5th Regiment, which is a 4-cost, 4/4 infantry, 0 operation cost. If it's in your hand when you lose a credit slot, reduce its cost by 2. If it's on the board when you lose a credit slot, give it +2/+2. That's like a good payoff. Oh, and we've also seen the Jake. The Jake is the 3-cost, 2/3 bomber. When you lose a credit slot, give all of your units +1/+1. So we've seen 2 payoffs. We've seen 2 new payoffs for the credit denial synergy, 1 new credit denial synergy card, and 1 credit denial synergy card coming back. So now we have 2 more things. 1 payoff, 1 credit denial card. So the credit denial card is what we're going to be looking at here. It is Commit the Reserves, and it's a 2 credit Japanese order. Destroy target unit with attack equal or less than your credit slots, lose a credit slot. So I think the easiest thing to compare this to immediately would be a card like Honorable Death, where it's 2 credits, destroy an enemy unit, they get an upside, which is drawing a card. Or enemy unit with 3 attack or less. Now, Commit the Reserves can be used just as removal, as a similar effect. Because, if it's like turn 6, turn 7, they play a Grenadier Guides. Commit the Reserves, 2 credits, destroy Grenadier Guides, lose a credit slot. You will happily lose a credit slot that late in the game to get rid of a Grenadier Guides, or get rid of a 7th Alpini, or whatever it is you're destroying, a KV, an armored train, etc. Commit the Reserves is just a very good piece of removal for aggressive decks, and the fact that it continues to scale, you would run this in Control. Like Japan Control, you're against aggro and they play a really annoying card you need to get rid of, like Signal Regiment. Yeah, you're willing to lose a credit slot to get rid of an early Signal Regiment to stop it dealing 10 damage to you or something. But if you're in a Control mirror, you'd happily play, Commit the Reserves on turn, 15, when you have 12 credit slots. The credit slot you lose, you will regain the next turn, so it doesn't even matter. And you can use it to destroy basically any unit in the game. You could destroy a Super Fortress with Commit the Reserves. Just 2 credits, destroy Super Fortress. This card, very, very, very powerful. But it's also a lose a credit slot card, which is going to be very good in the lose a credit slot synergy deck, because it's going to be triggering your 5th regiments. It's going to be triggering your Jake. So this is just going to be a very good card. I think you're going to see 2 of this card in every single credit denial deck, like self-credit denial deck. You're going to be seeing 2 of this card in probably every single Japan control deck, and you might see 1 or 2 of this in just regular Japan aggro, even if they're not running the whole countermeasure synergy. Like if they're not running Jakes, they're not running 5ths, they'll still probably run Desperate Measures and at least 1 Commit the Reserves, because it's just a really, really good card. Now, the question is, how good is the payoff? So we've seen Jake, a little inconsistent, a little slow. We've seen 5th, more consistent, but less immediately game-winningly powerful. Now we have One Roof. And you better get used to the name One Roof, because you're going to be hearing it a lot, because this card is absolutely insane. So, One Roof is a 4 credit, draw 2 cards order. Limited. So you might be immediately thinking, well, why would you ever play that? It's just more expensive Convoy. However, it costs 2 credit, or you gain 2 credits for each credit slot you have lost this battle. So now you're thinking, okay, it's, if you have played a Desperate Measures this game, One Roof is a 4 mana, draw 2 cards, gain 2 credits. So it's really like a 2 credits, draw 2 cards, which is slightly better than Convoy, but it has a conditional modifier where you have to have lost a credit effect. Fair. Now, if you've played Desperate Measures and a Commit the Reserves, or maybe 2 Commit the Reserves, One Roof becomes 4 credits, draw 2 cards, gain 4 credits. So now it's 0 mana, draw 2 cards. And that's pretty good. But again, it's conditional. You have to have lost credit slots twice, and that's pretty bad. Losing 2 credit slots is pretty bad. And, you know, you go even, but you have to have 4 credit slots to play the card. And, like, you know, expansion is 1 credit, draw 2 cards. How much better is 2 credits, or 0 credits, draw 2 cards? But, you know, maybe you've played 3 Airland, you play Airland and Sea to get a copy of Airland and Sea, which gets a copy of Desperate Measures, and then you play Commit the Reserves, and then you top deck the Desperate Measures naturally. Well, suddenly you've lost 5 credit slots this game. And if you can make it to turn 9, which should be pretty easy considering, you know, you've played 2 Commit the Reserves and 2 Desperate Measures, or whatever I just said. If you can make it to turn 9, by which point you will have 4 credit slots, and having 4 credit slots on turn 9 is pretty bad. However, it makes 1 roof, 4 credits, draw 2 cards, gain 10 credits. So it becomes 0 credits, draw 2, gain 6 credits, essentially. Which is insane, because you can then draw that into a second 1 roof. And if you played 0 credits, gain 6 credits, draw 2 cards, you can now play a second 0 credits, gain 6 credits, draw 2 cards, and now you have plus 12 credits, and, you know, 2 more cards in your hand to look at that aren't 1 roofs. And maybe you play the first 1 roof and it draws you into an Airland and Sea, so you play Airland and Sea and then you pick a copy of 1 roof off the Airland and Sea, and now you've lost an additional credit slot, but you have the additional credits from the first 1 roof to play the second 1 roof, which now gains you 12 credit slots, and that draws you into the second copy of the natural 1 roof still in your deck, and you play that, and you gain an additional 12 credit slots, and now you have 24 credits, and also 2 more cards in your deck, and you can play more Airland and Seas to find more 1 roofs, and, you know, you can throw out like a Sheet and Dawn Operations or whatever the hell you want to do, because you'll have so many credits. It's gonna be insane. 1 roof is crazy. And all of this, I've been talking about it as if you're playing the sort of the credit denial package. And sort of the self-credit denial package you'd think would be an aggro deck, because, you know, you have a lot of 1 and 2 cost units, probably a lot of 0 operation cost cards, so you can, you know, continue to play the game with few credits. And then you're playing cards like Commit the Reserves and Desperate Measures, as big tempo swings to stay in the game because you're an aggressive deck, and you can absolutely do all of this in an aggressive deck with your 5th regiments as sort of your 34th Guards-esque card where you cheat out the big guy to help with all of the swarms of little guys. You can absolutely do that, but you can also do this in just a control shell. You don't have to be denying all of your credits super early in the game. You can just be playing Japan control, you know? Stall out your opponent, play pin, play heal, play guards, use Japan ally in a Soviet deck or a Britain deck. And, you know, you, like, any Soviet deck with Great Patriotic War, where you're playing Sickles, you're playing Bryansk regiments, you know, you're playing Engineers, you're healing island defenses to gain more health, etc. And while you're at it, you play some Airland and Seas, fish through your deck, find your card draw, find your heal, find your AoE, whatever it is you're looking for, find your stall. And then, you know, over the course of the game, your 1 roofs get better and better and better until the turn you decide to combo your opponent and you play 2 1 roofs to go up to 24 credits or whatever the hell it is, and then you play Great Patriotic War, and then you have, like, still 18 credits left over to kill your opponent however you want. This is an incredibly powerful card. Like, I would be shocked if this card is not nerfed within the first month. This card is insane. Now, the question is, how good are the payoffs going to be? Because Burst of Fire is gone. So, you know, putting this in like a Tony type of deck is gone. But Japan certainly has other ways of winning the game. Last Rites and Kika are also gone. So, you know, the stall out the game and win with Kamikazes is gone. The Tony Burst of Fire is gone. So in a Japan main deck, finding like an OTK style for this might not work. Maybe you'll just have to stick to the sort of the more aggressive, where you just win with fast units and whatnot, burn out your opponent's HQ. But again, Japan as an ally, there's a lot of decks you could run this in. Now, you can't run this in Commonwealth anymore. That certainly would be very powerful, having a Britain-Japan stall. You can run Forced Surrenders as well, the Credit Denial package, 1 roofs, and then you win with Commonwealth. That would probably be very good. So it's a good thing Commonwealth has gone as well. And now it's suddenly starting to realize that, like, oh, wait, maybe they actually had a plan with, you know, the cards that they reserved. Maybe it's a good thing that they removed a large number of the stall out and win cards. But you know what they haven't removed? Push. dear lord, push is going to be annoying. Now, again, is the credit denial version of push actually going to be better than just playing Britain? Probably not, because push has no issue getting through to the bottom of their deck, and they have no issue stalling out, and the Britain stall package is much better than the Japan stall package. But again, Great Patriotic War existing. If that card had been rotated, I would say let it roll. Let's see what happens. Great Patriotic War still being in the game makes me very, very upset about this. I just hate Great Patriotic War. But yeah, get used to saying One Roof, because we will be hearing it a lot. This card is absolutely nuts. And again, the rest of the credit denial package is kind of expensive. You know, you're relying on specials, you're relying on elites. One Roof's a limited, but it's a limited where you need the specials and elites to really use. With how powerful One Roof is, it's going to be interesting to see if the self-credit denial deck just runs Dawn Operations, which is the 2-credit order, lose a credit slot, all of your air units operate for free this turn. Like, even if you're running next to no... Like, even if Shiden is your only air unit in the deck, would you just run Dawn Operations as a way to invest 2 credits into a future turn? Or potentially 4 or 6 credits, depending on how many One Roofs you're playing in the same turn? Also, hopefully the animations on this card is quick, because you might be playing, like, 30 cards in a turn. With One Roof into One Roof into One Roof into One Roof into One Roof. Because, again, Air, Land, and Sea creates copies of cards. This is going to be insane. But that is it for Japan today. Now we move on to the Soviets, where we have Catalina. It's a 2-cost Soviet bomber, 1/3 standard, with Blitz. And that's just really, really good body. Now, a lot of these times I've been stopping after describing the body and saying, like, is that good, is that bad? A 2-cost 1/3 bomber with Blitz is really good. Swordfish is a 1-cost 1/3 bomber without Blitz, and was one of the best units in the game. Well, it continues to be one of the best units in the game. Now, part of that is close air support. But, you know, 2-cost 1/3 bomber with Blitz is really good. Heinkel was a 2-cost 1/3 bomber with Blitz, and was so good it had to be nerfed. Now, Heinkel also gave you card draw. But, you know, people have played Katyusha in control decks or aggro decks where, you know, they just play it as a 3-cost way of dealing reach damage from the support line. Damage from hand. And that's exactly what Catalina is. It's damage from hand. You can play this and you can ping off a dude. You can run this in aggro decks as a bit more reach. It may be a Soviet ally combined arms package. This is an easy way to get in your bombers, because again, this is a standard. You could run 4 of this. And it's a Soviet one, so you can run this in the Soviet air deck with cards like Blood Red Sky. This is a really, really good card with Blood Red Sky. Now, previously, Soviet air has suffered from the fact that every Soviet air unit sucks. This card is not bad. This card is amazing. This card is so good that it might see limited play outside of dedicated Soviet air decks, Soviet bomber decks, whatever. This card is just really, really good. Now, it has an additional effect on it that I haven't mentioned up until now, which is it gets +2/+2 when an enemy countermeasure triggers. And I guess this is supposed to be like the anti-countermeasure card of the expansion, where they like to print cards to counter our new archetypes they release, just so, you know, if people complain about them, they can just, you know, craft Catalina. If you're seeing a lot of countermeasures, craft Catalina. Now, I don't think countermeasures are going to be particularly powerful. And I would imagine that the countermeasure finishes resolving before this gets +2/+2. So I imagine if you play this into a Careless Talk, this probably dies. And if you play it into a From the Deep, it definitely dies. And those are the main countermeasures being run. So the +2/+2 when an enemy countermeasure triggers is probably going to be pretty insignificant. But the fact that it's there is kind of scary. Like, you're absolutely going to have games, whether you're on the receiving end or not. You're going to have games where Catalina is on the board, and then somebody procs a completely unrelated countermeasure. You know, like they hold up Ultra to stop, like, a sickle. Or, you know, they have unexpected resistance to stop a unit going into the front line. They have an evasive action to stop whatever. Whatever it is, it's just going to be a fairly insignificant countermeasure. That's just your normal run-of-the-day countermeasure. And it's going to give Catalina +2/+2, and it's going to snowball the game, because now they have a 3/5 bomber, which is incredibly powerful. And, like, you could kind of just blow out the game on turn 3 with this. If your opponent's holding up, like, an evasive action, I guess evasive action wouldn't proc. And if they have the other 0-cost one, the new German 0-cost one, if they have that, this gets suppressed so that it doesn't gain the stats and it loses Blitz. But, like, if you can get this countermeasure to trigger on turn 3 or turn 4 with Catalina on board, you're just going to win. 3/5 bomber. It's over. But again, that's not going to be relevant. However, depending on how popular Catalina is, like if Soviet Air is just really popular for some reason, or maybe Soviet Ally Air, because honestly, like, yeah, you probably run this in Brit Air, doesn't make it the best. You'd still rather probably have air subs, but, you know, Catalina's really good card that you're going to want in a lot of decks. If Catalina exists enough in the meta, it's going to stop people from running, like, those sort of, like, one or two of countermeasures that they just throw into their deck sometimes, because they're not bad. Like, you know, the Tech in the Navy. Those might just stop existing if Catalina is popular enough, because you don't want, like, the games where you can't play a card in your hand because it will immediately lose you the game because of your opponent's Catalina. This is a very powerful card that, again, doesn't immediately fit into any tier 1 decks, but will almost certainly see a lot of play, if not immediately. It might be one of those cards that gets really, really popular after the first wave of, like, nerfing cards that are ludicrously strong. Because the last 2 expansions we've seen, Brothers in Arms and Winter War, we sort of, the expansion drops, and then there's some ludicrously broken stuff that's really popular, and then the first sort of nerf wave goes through, and then the meta becomes much more diverse, and you see a lot of different stuff trying out, and then like a lot of the other archetypes that weren't broken from the expansion start to see more play. So it might not see play in the first month or two until whatever the balance patch happens, whenever the balance patch that nerfs this card happens. But, you know, I will be shocked if this card does not see any play in OCC in, you know, within the 6 months of this expansion being live. Then we have another covert card, because again, Soviets seem to be getting a lot of covert synergy cards. And they have the 213th Rifle Regiment, which is a 3-cost, 5/3 ambush infantry. And just that on its own, very good body. Incredibly good body. Now, that's the same body as Kagoshima. Just straight up is the same body as Kagoshima, and Kagoshima has the enemy can't heal. But, you know, 3-cost, 5/3 ambush body is good enough to have been run on its own in the past. Now, its upside is it's also covert. And this is gonna suck. Because remember the other Soviet covert card that we looked at? I think it was a 2/3 infantry, the one that if it's covert for 3 or 4 turns, you get the T-34 1942, the one that you want to kill immediately when your opponent plays it. Well, now you don't know if it's going to be that, the one that dies quite easily, but you need to attack into it because it's covert, or if it's going to be the 5/3 ambush that kills whatever you attack into it. And, like, if your opponent pushes a covert card to the front line, like, you know, this just stops Schutzens, it stops 5th Rangers, it stops Winter Regiments. This is a monster. This is a beast. And because it's such a powerful card, it has the effect, reveal, lose 3 credits at the start of your next turn. So if your opponent reveals it on their turn, you will start the following turn with 3 less credits. If you reveal this on your turn, the turn after you reveal it, you will lose 3 credits. So you have to factor that into the cost of the card, but if the cost of the card gives you, like, an insane game-winning trade because your opponent doesn't know what it is and they trade into their big thing into it and it loses them the game, or if it's just the fear of this stops them from playing their big thing because they can't afford to lose it if it is this, you're happy. This card is incredibly good. This card is probably going to be the card that makes or breaks the covert deck, because the fact that you have other covert cards that your opponent probably wants to kill and then this monster is terrified. Any ground-based deck is going to lose to this card because there's just no easy way to reveal it. Now, again, the reveal effect is quite bad. It is very, very bad, the reveal effect, but that's a one-time trigger, and again, if this triggers on your turn, you're probably happy to eat it. Or sorry, if this triggers on your opponent's turn, you're probably happy to eat the effect. If it triggers on your turn, it probably means you're having to trade out to the front line and the game's over. So again, I feel like the covert deck's going to be very, very snowbally, and it's going to come down, if they get ahead, if they get the front line against any other board-based aggro or mid-range deck, it's just going to come down to, coin tosses, where it's just like, is it a 213th Rifle Regiment, or is it one of the other ones? Yeah, this card is quite scary. Then we have a very interesting card, the SU-100. I've seen a lot of discussion about this card, and that's because it's a 4-cost, 1-operation, 4/3 Blitz tank with special rarity, with the text +4 attack if damaged. So a lot of people immediately think of this with Hellcat, which is same rarity, Similar stat line, it's a 3 cost for 2 Blitz tank, 1 op. So this is 1 extra cost for 1 extra health, basically. With the added effect of +4 attack if damaged. So, how good is this? Because Hellcat is a core card in Frontline, but that's because Frontline has Blitzkrieg, and that's because Frontline has Sherman. And this does not trigger Sherman, it doesn't, I mean, it can technically trigger Blitzkrieg, but there's not any Soviet Blitzkrieg decks in the meta right now. Although I suppose technically no one played one. There is some very limited Soviet tank synergy cards, but this feels a little too slow to me to be run in those types of decks. Like, it's very difficult for an aggressive deck to get much use out of this, because it's really slow to set up for a Blitzkrieg turn with other tanks, and it's really awkward if you're an aggro deck to, like, trigger the damage on this and then attack. Because it's really easy to attack into something, and this survives, and now it has 8 attack, and then your opponent just finishes it off with any number of cards. You want to be getting the +4 attack before attacking. However, that means you have to damage this on your turn somehow yourself, probably the turn you played it, which is really not easy. It's remarkably difficult. Like, and one thing a lot of people thought of was counteroffensive. Counteroffensive is +2/+1. Give a friendly tank or infantry +2/+1 for each damaged unit on the board, and you play Winter Warfare counteroffensive and give whatever unit a lot of health. And a lot of people thought, well, you just run this in a counteroffensive deck. To that I would say, what counteroffensive deck? Because how much health is this to a counteroffensive deck? Because you're not playing counteroffensive on this guy, because the counteroffensive will heal it above 3. It will no longer be damaged anymore. So you need to play this, and then Winter Warfare counteroffensive, and then play the counteroffensive on a different unit. Which means, if this is attacking, either you're in a situation where you have 6 additional credits to operate with, and you need the 8 damage burn to get across the line. When is that ever going to happen for counteroffensive? That is such an unlikely situation. Counteroffensive usually wins by miles if it wins and loses by miles if it loses. This card does not change that. So I don't think this card is going to remotely help counteroffensive decks. You probably would run it in a counteroffensive deck, but I don't think it's like a big push to the deck. So what is this going to be run in? I've also seen a lot of people discussing this in Control, because Hellcat is good enough to just run in Control decks. I've been a big proponent of that. Less so now, because US slots are more coveted, and, you know, 5th Rangers came out. But in the past, I ran 2 copies of Hellcat in every single Brit US deck I ever played, because Hellcat was just really, really good at trading out cards. However, we've moved away from big tanks. There's very few tanks in the game for the double damage to tanks, the Hellcat effect. So it's better than this, but how good is Soviets with a 4-cost Blitz tank? I feel like Soviets don't want this, because Soviets have the removal for better things. If they're trading with this, like, you would just rather have a hammer. You know, you'd rather have, I guess, Partisans is being rotated, but, like, I feel like Soviets just have better options than SU-100. So then the question becomes, if you're playing this in a Soviet control deck, and you run this as a flexible card, you know, sometimes you're using this as removal, sometimes you're using this for a bit of reach. Because you're Soviet control, you have Sickles, you have Winter Warfares, and eventually you're going to have one of them in your hand, and then you play SU-100, you Sickle it, and you hit face for 8. How good is that? Not amazing? Not terrible. Not terrible. It's good enough to experiment with, but I feel like I'm very skeptical of how good that would be. And also, I don't think Soviet control doesn't exist now, and they're losing a lot of cards. Where is this mythical Soviet deck that's going to be able to experiment running random, like, reach cards going to be? I don't see how this card fits into anything. It's just a weird card. And again, as a 4/3 also makes this really awkward, because you can't, like, play this into, like, a countermeasure or something, because Careless Talk kills this. If it was a 3/4, you could play it into Careless Talk, and it would be hilarious. But yeah, this card just seems remarkably difficult to use, despite how interesting and just on paper powerful it is. And like, I'm sure people will play this card. I'm absolutely positive that people will play this card. This card will probably see play in OCZ within the next 6 weeks. Or it's not 6 weeks, 6 months. it's just not going to be popular, and I don't think it's going to be the card that makes the decks that people are playing it in good. Like, I don't think this is going to be a win con. I don't think this is going to be the card carrying those decks forward. I think people are just going to, like, experiment with this and play it in, like, some sort of German-Soviet or Soviet-German tank deck just because it's fun, like we saw No Win do today. Then we have, we go on to US, and we have Mayhem, which I'm sure a lot of people probably, like, skipped ahead in the video just to see my reaction to this card. I saw a lot of people asking me to comment on this card when it was revealed, because Mayhem is a 4-cost US order. Choose a unit in hand, swap it with a friendly unit in the battlefield. So, there's a lot of cards with similar effects in the game. There's Gambit, which is pull the highest cost card from both players' hands and put them on the board. There's Machines of War, which is pull the top Soviet infantry card from your deck and put it into the battlefield for 5 credits, and you exclusively run that with, like, 6 cost and higher infantries. There is Western Allies, which is pull the top non-French card from your deck and put it into the battlefield. People have run that with a very low unit deck with US-France ramp with cards like Super Fortress and Pershing, etc. to cheat out those cards. There is Special Assignment, which is a 6-cost US order. Choose a unit in hand, put it into the battlefield, so it's like Mayhem, but you don't have to swap something for 2 credits more. And then there is Partisans, which I had very, very strong things to say about the last Partisans, and a lot of people blame me for getting it changed. Well, it depends how you feel about it. A lot of people praise me or blame me for getting it changed. Now, I'm not the reason Partisans got changed. I might have been, like, partially influential, but absolutely I do not have changes. Like, I have control over 1939 balance. That does not happen. I would not complain about the game nearly as much as I do if I had control over what the balance changes look like. But the difference between this and Partisans is Partisans was random. My complaint with Partisans is 1/3 of the time you play Partisans and you randomly win the game. Or 1/4 of the time, or whatever it was. Mayhem, you need to have a unit on board, and a card in hand, and Mayhem in hand. So it's a 3-card combo to swap a unit onto the board, versus a single card that randomly generates a big unit. This is very, very different from Partisans. Now, do I like this card? In the way that people are predominantly going to play it, which is just try to cheat out really, really big cards early, no, I think that's a really, really dumb strategy, and we have plenty of those cards in the game already. I don't know why you need to print more of them. However, there is very niche situations where you could just play this in a more standard ramp deck as just a good card. Like, you know, you play a Bryansk on turn 5, and then on turn 6, you attack the Bryansk into something to deal... Or not Bryansk, Glamour Boys. You play Glamour Boys on turn 5, and then on turn 6, you attack into something for 3 damage. You Mayhem the Glamour Boys back to your hand, so it heals it, and you can replay it to get the deployment effect again, and then you put into play with Mayhem, like, either like a Grenadier Guards is just another big guard, or maybe you put in a Blitz card, maybe you put in a big guy. You know, it depends on what you're running in your deck, it depends on what the board state is, but, like, you know, even just, like, swapping out a California Regiment, you're going down a card, which is not good to do that, but, you know, you can just do Britain Ally, and Britain has plenty of card draw. I think it's a card that could experimentally work in US-Britain ramp decks. Like, outside of just the hot cheese way that people are going to try. And I think that's interesting. I think if this card is not used to cheat out Persians on turn 3, or whatever they're going to do, I think it's interesting. Now, the fact that it can cheat out Persians on turn 3 is pretty stupid, don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's going to be nearly as consistent enough to be able to do that, unlike Partisans. And even if you build your entire deck around the 1 in 4 games where you can cheat out a turn 3 Persian, that's fine because you built your deck around that. Like, if you go back to my complaints about Partisans, if you build your deck around Western Allies to pull out a Persian from your deck with a 6-credit Western Allies guide, that's fine. My complaint with Partisans is you could just play a completely 38-card normal deck, and then you run a 1 copy of Partisans, because 1/4 of the time, that 1 copy of Partisans wins you the game. So yeah, Mayhem, is a very fascinating card. We're going to see some weird, really wacky stuff with this card. It's going to be cool. But personally, I am fine with this card existing. Then we get on to what US's theme seems to be. Now, we've seen with the US the if you have X number of unspent credit cards, with the America at War and Bomber Mafia, if I remember the names correctly. This seems to be a different... I mean, you would probably run it in similar decks, but this seems to be one of the other payoff cards for US ramp, or sort of the US main ramp, that they're going for with this expansion, and this is Yank. So Yank is a 6 credit order. This battle, when you develop a card, also develop a retribution. So for the rest of the game, anytime you develop a card, also develop a retribution. Now, immediately you read a card like this, you have to ask, 1, what the hell is a retribution? And 2, how many developed cards are in the game? Because there's Bomber Mafia, but you need to play it with the... the damage is the conditional part. So there's Bomber Mafia, which is a very good card you're going to be running. So that's 2 developed cards. And then, like, you could do Japan Ally and run Airland and Seas. You could do Britain Ally and run Bryansk, the Baker Street Irregulars. We haven't seen a ton of develop added to the game yet. And Yank itself does not develop anything. Yank does not trigger when you play it. So this is a 6 credit sink into the future. It's sort of similar to Feigned Retreat in that way. Now, it doesn't dump your hand, but it also doesn't give you the immediate insane engine of Feigned Retreat. It's sort of like a tuned down Feigned Retreat, where if you can afford to play 6 credit order, for the rest of the game, you're going to be able to generate a lot of additional value. Whereas Feigned Retreat is if you can do a 6 credit order, for the rest of the game, you're going to have insane tempo, because every single card you play also draws a card. You're never going to run into cards and you'll be able to just dump hand, go all face, and win. Whereas Yank is going to be generating cards. It basically makes all of your cards generate more cards. Now, generally, I'm not a fan of this type of card, because that's what happened in Hearthstone, where I really like playing Hearthstone Control, where you would have a fixed number of threats in your opponent's deck, and you would have a fixed number of answers in your deck, and you would have to try to parse out when you use your answers on their threats. Or vice versa, you would try to parse out your threats and bait out their answers. I absolutely love that type of gameplay. And then Hearthstone went and added every single control deck has the ability to generate 20,000 additional cards, and the value went out the window because your opponent would be able to generate an infinite number of threats and an infinite number of answers, and nothing means anything anymore. Now, I don't think we're going to get there with Yank, because this card seems incredibly bad, but there is going to be those incredibly greedy ramp players where you're going to be playing control, and they're just going to have a Yank deck. And, like, you know, you're sitting back with your armored trains or whatever, and they just play, like, a turn 5 Yank. They played War Machine, maybe a turn 4 Yank if they do War Machine into, like, Milk Truck or War Machine into America at War. And they slap a Yank super early in the game, and then they just start developing retributions for the rest of the game, and you get blown out. And that's another thing I don't like about this card, is if Yank is the last card in your deck sucks. Because your deck's going to have a ton of random develop cards that aren't giving you additional value, and you're not going to be saving them for Yank, probably. So the question is, like, how worth it is Yank? Like, you're sort of forced to try to play it as quickly as possible once you draw it, and it has no immediate effect. It's just an incredibly greedy win more card. I don't like it. I don't think it's that good. Hopefully we can just move on. So, now, all of that said, what is a retribution? First, let's look at another card they revealed, is the 121st Infantry Regiment, which is a 5-cost 5/4 Blitz standard. Stat line's pretty bad, but not terrible. Like, you know, you're probably going to be running this as a ramp deck. And a ramp deck is going to accept a card with Blitz. And the higher attack over the destruction effect is good, or over the health is good because it has a destruction effect, and you're going to be wanting to play this as removal. You know, your opponent pushes the Schütze into the front line, you play 121st Infantry Regiment and trade it out, and its destruction is add an outrage to your hand. So now we have an outrage and a retribution. What are these cards? Well, an outrage is a 1-cost develop a retribution. So you'll be given 3 retributions, and you pick one to go into your hand. Now you might be wondering, well, why the hell would you do that instead of just give me a random retribution? And it's because this is going to trigger Yank. So if you play Yank, the outrages you get off 121st Infantry Regiment are all going to trigger twice. So basically, you are going to, anytime you play Outrage after playing Yank, you develop 2 retributions. It's going to double the effect of all of your outrages. And that is probably going to be the primary way where you're going to be trying to use Yank, is with these outrages. So what is Retribution? Well, there are 12 different Retribution cards. It is a pool of 12 cards that are not going to be in your collection. You can't just run these in your deck. And you are, when you play an outrage, you are given 3 of those 12 cards at random, and you pick one of them. So they're just sort of good effect orders. So they've only shown off 3 of the retributions so far, so we don't know what all 12 are. I will cover the additional 9 in the future as they come out. It's kind of odd to me that they didn't reveal all of them at once, but oh well. But the 3 retributions that we have seen so far are 2 credits, deal 5 damage to target unit. Now this is any unit, air or ground, so, which is incredibly good. Like, you know, you say this is a 5 credit 5/4 in Blitz Infantry destruction, add a 3 cost, deal 5 damage to target unit to your hand. That's just good value. You would probably play that in a decent number of decks. Then there is Retribution, 2 cost, deal 2 damage to target unit, draw a card. Now, would you play a 5 cost 5/4 infantry destruction, add a 3 cost, deal 2 damage, draw a card to your hand? Maybe. Then, last but not least, we have a 5 credit, deal 2 damage to all enemy units. This seems a little expensive to me. But would you play a 5 cost 5/4 infantry blitz destruction effect, add a 6 cost, deal 2 damage to all enemy units to your hand? Probably not, to be completely honest. And that is sort of in the crux of it, the issue with Retribution, is if you could always get this card, you would play it. If you could always get this card, you'd probably play it. If you always get this card, you don't play it. Now, you will always be able to pick the best of 3 options, meaning the worst 2 Retribution options are never going to be picked. Like, you never have to pick the worst 2 Retribution options, because there will always be a 3rd option which is better. Now, based on how Retribution looks, I'm imagining it's going to be very, very different which one is good and bad, depending on your situation. It's flexible. It's not just there are good options and bad options. There's going to be an option where you need to destroy a very big single target. There's going to be an option where your hand size is low, but the opponent doesn't have a lot of cards, so maybe you want the card draw. There's going to be an issue where your opponent has a lot of very small units, so you're going to want the AoE. And then we're going to find out what the other 9 cards do, but presumably there's going to be more of the cards of this type, like maybe they heal, maybe they draw more cards, maybe they generate units, I don't know. But yeah, we'll have to see. And it gets the best of these 3 choices, and none of them are great, but all of them are kind of good. So that is going to be the interesting thing. I'm leaning towards this is just going to be too slow to be meaningful, and it's just going to be bad. But unlike other US or US archetypes that they've tried to push in the past, like Repair, for example, this seems far more playable. Because you don't need a dedicated Yank deck. Maybe you're just playing like a US Britain ramp or Britain US ramp, and you just run a couple 121sts. Like, maybe you just run 2 of them. Because, you know, generating 2 outrages is fine. You don't need to develop twice off of them. Just running one of them might be good enough. Just a nice flexible option. It gives you some interesting options in card effects that US kind of struggles with. US kind of struggles with single target order-based removal for cheap. It kind of struggles with AoE, and it can kind of struggle with card draw in the heavier versions of the deck where you're not really getting Shermans off. So, you know, it's just a very flexible card. I like the design. I don't think it's going to be that good. It'll probably see some limited tournament play because you're going to have somebody who's going to be teching for heavy control decks. So their response is going to be to just like make a super heavy outrage Yank deck where they're just going to outvalue their opponent to the moon. But I think that this is going to be still incredibly slow, and based on everything we've seen, I don't think this is going to stop them from just getting rolled over by Jagro, or maybe comboed out of the game by Push or One Roof. And then we get on to the Ally cards, we have Convoy Attack. And, oh boy, Convoy Attack. This card is upsetting to me for a number of reasons. So Convoy Attack is an Italian card, 0 cost, order, deal 0 to 2 damage to any target. This can target HQ, this can target units, friendly or enemy. 0 to 2 damage. This sucks. And I don't just mean the card is bad, I mean this effect should not be in the game. In early beta, cards like Mito Regiment and Hayabusa, which are destruction, deal 2 damage to the enemy HQ, used to say destruction, deal 1 to 3 damage to the enemy HQ. And then they changed them, and do you know why? Because having RNG cards like that, a card where its effect is one of 3 options, and they are just objectively better, it is just a linear progression of how good the effect is, are terrible. Nobody likes to play them. Nobody likes to play against them. They aren't fun. They aren't good card design. Why do they exist in the game? And you might look at a card like Katyusha, where, you know, it's 50% of the time it does 1 more damage. And, like, I don't love that design, but that's 50% of the time you deal 1 more damage between 1 and 2. Which is not an incredibly relevant damage thing, because very few things have 2 health. And most of the time you're playing Katyusha as a guaranteed ping effect, where you're just trying to deal 1 damage to damage something or kill off a 1 health guy. Convoy Attack is 0 to 2. This is the worst thing ever. 1/3 of the time this card does literally nothing. This isn't 1 cost 1 to 3, where you play this on a 2 health unit and it deals 1 damage, and you're like, well, that sucks, I'm gonna lose the game now. This is your opponent plays a cavalry regiment, and you play this, and 1 and 3 it does 0 damage, and you just wasted a card. You just burnt a card from your hand, and your opponent still has the cavalry regiment. This card is laughably bad. And, like, I don't get it. I don't get why they thought this card was a good choice to add to the game, because Italy right now is just thinking off the top of my head, I think Italy is got to be the least played ally nation in the game. Like, sorry, the least played nation in the game. Certainly at a high level. I don't think there's been 1 Italy ally deck in a tournament since Winter War came out. And this is the card you're going to give them for the next expansion? Is Convoy Attack? Really? There's two types of Italy decks. There is Alpine, which are running 12 Italian Alpine cards, and there's no room for anything else. And there's Italy Control, which is running the 12 best Italian control cards, and this doesn't even begin to make the cut. Like, what are you running this in? L640? L640 has better options. Run USAUS. It's a guaranteed +1/+1 for 0 credits, rather than a sometimes 2 damage, sometimes 1 damage, sometimes 0 damage. This card is awful. This card is the worst card they have shown, possibly ever. And on top of being the worst card ever, it's also just horrifically designed. This is terrible. I am ashamed that they released this card, or are going to release this card. And I know what other people are going to say. I know a lot of people are thinking, like, well, you play this with the Japanese order buff cards, so you play this with a Siren on the board, so it becomes 0 cost to deal 1 to 3 damage. So now you're guaranteed to deal damage. That's a terrible combo. Japan has infinitely better ways to deal burn. They have infinitely better ways to get value out of Siren. Like, in what world is there this Japanese-Italian deck that has infinite card draw and plays around playing Siren quadruple convoy attack? And even if that is a deck that exists, you know, they're going to be trying to destroy a 2-defense unit, and they play Siren convoy attack, and it deals 1 damage, and then they lose the game because convoy attack sucks. I cannot wait for the person who, like, plays Jaggro and they play turn 1 cavalry regiment, and then their opponent plays 4 convoy attacks, all of which deal 0 damage and surrender. Like, that's going to be a funny clip, and that's going to be the only good thing we get out of this card. This card is so dumb. I am baffled that this card exists. Then we move on to some more interesting cards. Italy is getting the 184th Fulgor, A 2-credit 3/4 guard costs 1 more to deploy if you started the battle. So if you went first this game, it is a 3-cost 3/4 guard, which, as I mentioned previously, is sort of just the standard rate. And if you didn't go first, if you went second, it is a 2-cost 3/4 guard, which is really good. And it's 1 op cost. This is a very interesting card. And I think this is a very interesting design space. Because we've seen so many cards where it's like, if you go first, you win the game. Looking at Yukaberg's Pioneer. Where it's just, if you get it on the play, you win the game. Now, Fulgor is sort of the opposite of that. It's better if you went second. And a lot of people I see are complaining about this because they're like, why would you just have a card that's explicitly better 50% of the time based on something you cannot control? And it shouldn't be thought of as this card is, like, insane if you go second. It's this card is making up for the fact that your opponent went first if you went second. Like, you played... this card is making up for the fact that your opponent already probably got a really strong opening advantage from going first. Now, not every deck likes to go first, but the decks that Fulgor is going to be good against are the decks that like to go first. Fulgor is going to be good against aggro decks, and aggro decks really, really like to go first. So, I think this is an interesting design territory to move into. I think I don't love this design space. I would prefer if going first versus second was not as impactful as it is, but, you know, that's just the nature of a card game. It's always going to be quite impactful going first versus second. So I like that they're trying to fix it rather than continuing to just print an infinite number of cards where it's like, if you went first, you win the game, because you get to play the broken card first. So I think this is a really interesting card, and I think it's a good card. We've seen Italian control decks run Fiat in the past. It's just a 2-credit, 2/3 plane that can heal. It's annoying for the opponent to deal with, but it's 2-op, it's really slow, it's kind of awkward. Fulgor seems like a really good choice as like a replacement for that, where you just get additional guards. Since they changed the Bologna regiment, people have been finding it much less useful. Fulgor is a good replacement for that as well. And it's on Alpine, so, like, you know, you can maybe play Italian control with just Decimas and Line for Days and Fulgor, and the card we're going to take a look at in a second. And cut the 7th Alpinis because you're too afraid of Devil's Brigade. But yeah, I think this is a very interesting card that is probably going to see play eventually. Like, if people play Italian control decks, they'll probably try Fulgor, or at least a couple copies. The question is, are people going to play Italian control decks? I kind of doubt it. The card art's really cool, though. I don't know if you can see, but those are, like, crows or ravens or something in a massive, like, horde behind the guy. Yeah, cool card. Then let's take a look at the 3rd Italian card they're revealing. I don't know if this is going to be the last Italian card. I'm trying to think if they revealed more of them, but the Allied nations usually don't get a lot of new cards. But this is a special, so this is the highest rarity Italian card you're going to get. It is a 3-cost order, pin target unit, and then destroy it if it has the single highest attack on the battlefield. So 3 credits, pin target unit, is terrible. It is actively awful. It is laughably bad. It might be one of the only ways in the game to pin a friendly unit at will, because almost every other pin card says pin enemy unit. This might be one of the only ways to pin a friendly unit. But, you know, just 3 credits pin a unit. Terrible. But the other effect is then destroy it if it has the single highest attack on the battlefield. Means that this card is going to be played 99% of the time as a 3 credits destroy the single highest attack unit on the battlefield. Now, the issue with this is, one, if you have the single highest attack unit on the battlefield, like if your opponent's playing Jagro, so all the units have 2 attack, and then you play like a 7th Alpini, which has 4 attack, you can't use dagger strikes on anything. And if it's the single highest, meaning if there's 2 of them, it doesn't destroy it. Meaning if you play a 7th Alpini, which is 4 attack, and then they play a Shiden, which is also 4 attack, you can pin it, but you can't kill it with dagger strikes. Because again, it's on the entire battlefield, it's not just the enemy's side of the battlefield. Or, probably going to be a common situation is you're playing against Frontline, and they have like a 4-attack shoots in and 2 Shermans on board and like a Hellcat. They have like 4 health units, and Dagger Strikes is terrible and does nothing. Now, for every time that happens, you might be playing against something like German midrange, where they slam down an FW, and then you have 3 credits destroy their FW, which is one of the best ways to answer FW in the game. This is an incredibly powerful tool to answer cards from very specific decks. The issue is it's kind of awkward. So is this better than Lion for a Day? I'm leaning towards no. Like, it costs 1 less than Lion for a Day, so oftentimes it might just be better Lion for a Day. But Lion for a Day is infinitely more flexible. The one thing Dagger Strikes has going for it is sometimes you will just play it for the pin. Like, sometimes just pinning your opponent is going to be enough to then win the game later with other cards or prevent them from killing you, whatever it is. So it's interesting. It's going to be a card. People are going to try it out. I kind of doubt it makes it into the deck as a 2-of, in the same way Lion for a Day has been a 2-of in Italian Control. So, yeah, I think maybe if you're running Italian Control, you do like 2 Lion for a Days, 1 Dagger Strikes, something like that. But we'll have to see. It's an interesting answer to sort of big threat cards. And then we get on to the last card we're going to be looking at today, which is Punish. It is a Polish card, a 2-credit, Intel 1 order. The enemy discards a random card, draw a card if it was known. So, 2 credits, enemy discards a random card. That is a very powerful effect. People have run, unironically, U375, which is the opponent discards a random card that costs 5 or less. This is just better than that. It is U375, but it can discard any card, and also it has Intel 1, and also, if it discards an Intel card, you draw. So if this is 2 credits, discard a card, draw a card, that's insane. That is absolutely insane. It's not, like, as good as Wolfpack, but again, this is a 2-credit card. It's ludicrously powerful. But the issue is, 1, how easily are you going to be able to, like, fully intel your opponent's hand? 2, if your opponent has no cards in hand, this card is completely useless. It doesn't have the Wolfpack effect. And 3, it is Polish. You cannot run this in a, like, German-Britain discard or Britain-German discard. It's Polish. It doesn't have any exile. And there is 0 other support in Poland for a discard theme or a draw denial theme. However, I think it's just good enough that you run it. Like, maybe the Polish, like, Legion's Intel package moving forward is, like, 2 Tardau, 2 Keras, 4 Plan West, and then, like, 2 Punish, 1 Uprising, and 1 Enemy at the Gates. Not Enemy at the Gates. Underground State. Like, maybe that's just the package. Because honestly, just running 2 of these in, like, just any deck seems good. Like, it just seems kind of good. Because if your opponent has, like, 1 card in hand, or, like, your opponent has an Intel card in hand, like, if your opponent's playing Research is Intel, like, adds Intel, or, like, you know, Panzer Grenadiers adds 2 Intel cards to their hand. There's ways for your opponent to add, like, give you Intel on their own hand. And then if you just play this with even, like, a couple other Intel cards, this is just 2 credits, discard, draw card. And that's insane. And if you don't draw a card off this, just 2 credits, discard an enemy card at random. Not bad. And even if you have no other Intel cards in your deck, there's always a chance this draws, because it will Intel first, and there's always a chance that it draws. So, like, even if this is just, like, you know, 2 credits, discard a card, 25% of the time, draw a card, that's insane. You're going to run that card. But again, it's a Polish card, so we're going to have to wait and see. It's a frustrating card, but if it was like a Britain card or a German card, this would be insane and way too powerful to release. As a Polish card, where Poland has no other clear synergy with this, it's interesting. Maybe you run this into Legion's Control, because it does have the Intel, and that will give you other Intel to make this draw more regularly. But also, maybe you just run this in, like, just general Poland Control. Maybe we are slowly moving towards a non-Legions-based Poland Control being viable. If so, really cool. But either way, you're probably going to see a lot of Punish. You're probably going to be really annoyed by Punish. And the name is very fitting. It sort of reminds me of Forced Surrender for the Pin Everything Twice card. Where the Punish is going to discard, like, you know, your game-winning card. Yeah. But that is every card that I had to reveal today. Japan, credit dial looking insane. US is getting the retribution. It's interesting. Soviet is still a massive mixed bag of some good cards. No super clear direction for them. Britain is gonna get the shark is gonna make air interesting, but otherwise they're leading towards sort of the commandos theme. And then for the ally nations, France, we haven't seen a lot from France yet. Italy is just getting 2 good control cards and the worst card I've ever seen in my life, and Poland is getting punished. That's going to be interesting. So let me know what you think of these cards. Did I miss anything? Did I misspeak anywhere in the video? I know last time I said the Covert summoned the 5/5 heavy armor 1 tank. It's actually the 5/5 blitz tank. I got that wrong. Let me know any mistakes I need to correct. Or just let me know your thoughts on the cards down below. If you want to continue the discussion, there's a link to my Discord down below as well, where you can join my Discord and continue the conversation there with myself or others. And subscribe if you haven't already, so you can catch part 3, which is going to be up probably in about a week's time when they announce more cards. So with that, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.